Hello everyone, it's Dylan from Yu-Gi-Oh! Everything, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh! Discussion video. This time we will be going over a Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie that was actually scrapped from production. This was a movie that Kazuki Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, wanted to do before Bonds Beyond Time. I believe it was after Pyramid of Light, before Bonds Beyond Time, while Yu-Gi-Oh! GX was airing. That never actually occurred. We have our three main movies, of course, Pyramid of Light, Bonds Beyond Time, and Dark Side of Dimensions. This is the only one, to our knowledge, that was proposed but never actually went through, and there were a few people, actually a decent amount of people from my knowledge, that do not know this movie was ever even a thing or was going to be a thing. So I thought it would be a cool discussion video to go over it and talk about it, since now that Dark Side of Dimensions finished, and pretty much the entire story of Duel Monsters and the original Yu-Gi-Oh! You would imagine is finished. Dark Side of Dimensions was a very satisfying and probably concrete conclusion to the original cast of Yu-Gi-Oh! It makes me wonder, as I'm sure it makes a lot of fans wonder, will we have another Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie? Will we have a Yu-Gi-Oh! Movie that is carried by the crew of GX, by the bonds of 5Ds, by the cast of Zale, Arc 5, Reigns? Or, because Yugi Moto would not be in those movies, do they feel it's too big of a risk? Because every movie has pertained to the original crew, or at least Yugi, in some way, shape, or form. So we are going to be going over this, and I'm going to do more videos on whether I think movies for each show can happen and what I would like to see in those movies. That, of course, will be in a different video. But before I get really off topic, let's begin, and hopefully you guys let me know if you would have liked to see this movie down below. So this movie would have been titled Yu-Gi-Oh! VS GX. This was revealed, by the way, in an interview after Volume 8 of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Bunkoban, which is a reprint of the Yu-Gi-Oh! Manga. It's in 22 volumes, so the manga is reprinted on higher quality, has some redesigned covers and more chapters per volume. And again, after every volume, Kazuki Takahashi would give a brief interview. And in the back of Volume 8, this interview came out, kind of out of nowhere, where Takahashi said, yeah, there was going to be a movie where the characters from Yu-Gi-Oh! Dueled the characters from GX and met up with the characters from GX. So the plot would have been something along these lines. The students of Duel Academy went on a field trip to Domino City. Among them was a tarot card reader, Sartorius, or Sayu in the original, who wished to defeat Yugi Moto and the other legendary duelists. Strange circumstances led Jaden to meet Yugi and Joey. Sayu contacted Kaiba Corp to plot his scheme, which is kind of interesting. So that was the initial plot of the movie, and I'm sure the one thing that sticks out to you guys right away is, well, Dylan, wasn't this just Season 2 of GX? Which, to a degree, besides Yugi and Joey Wheeler being there, to a degree it was. You even have Sayu reaching out to Kaiba Corp, which he did in Season 2 of GX, so clearly elements of this proposed movie did happen, and I think it is actually really cool that even though this movie never happened, it wasn't like this was a completely scrapped idea, which we've done a few summaries recently, actually, from the Yu-Gi-Oh! Zale anime that never actually came to fruition. This wasn't a scrapped idea with characters that we were never going to see. This was basically transformed into Season 2, so I think it's cool that they still paid tribute to this idea, and they just, instead of doing a movie, put it into Season 2. So the development and where this idea came from was when Takahashi had unmet expectations after seeing Mazinger Z versus Devilman in his childhood. He came up with the idea about a year after GX had begun broadcasting. Takahashi contemplated reviving a TEM, but didn't want to betray the theme of the original story. After the idea was dropped, Takahashi commented that it was fun to see Yugi and the others in his head after such a long time, and that Yugi facing Judai couldn't happen, as it would be a hero facing his comrade. So I think that one line about him not wanting to revive a TEM, but didn't want to betray the theme of the original story, was probably the most interesting line from this entire excerpt, from the entire interview, because 10 years later, I believe this interview came out in 2007, 10 years later, we do have that. We have a TEM being revived, and I think it's so interesting because even though when a TEM was revived in Dark Side of Dimensions, I loved the scene. I thought it was such a badass scene. I thought it was one of the best scenes of the movie. Gave me chills to see a TEM back on the big screen, to see him just back in action defeating Agami. But there were a few people that had complaints about it and said, you know, it kind of undermines how the original story ends. It kind of undermines the moment when Atem walks into the afterlife, which is a very iconic scene, him giving the thumbs up to the gang, walking into the death, walking into his afterlife. And I completely understand that point, by the way, and I think it's interesting that even Takahashi, the creator of Yu-Gi-Oh!, probably would have agreed with a lot of those critics back in 2007 that it did betray the theme of the original story, which was all about getting Atem to the afterlife. And a few people said Atem being back kind of took the spotlight away from Yugi, like that this movie was supposed to be Yugi's coming out movie, a big movie for him where he's finally front and center without the Pharaoh. And I thought it still was that, but that moment kind of took away what could have been a really awesome moment for his character, with Atem coming back and bailing him out of trouble, basically, and bailing the world out of trouble. Even though, again, I loved the scene, but I understand that perspective of it. And I think it's interesting that Takahashi probably battled with these inner demons of, do I revive Atem? Do I not revive Atem? Does that betray the story? Or will the scene still be so awesome that it's worth it to just bring him back for one little moment? He probably debated that for 10 years. Probably ever since Duel Monsters concluded, because again, he had the idea for this movie to bring back Atem in 2007. Probably, actually, GX after a year it was airing, that was probably like 2006 maybe, 2005, I'm not sure when GX started. Okay, so GX started airing in 2004, so he got the idea for this movie sometime in 2005. So yeah, for the better part of probably a little over a decade, he was having this, I'm sure, inner battle on whether he should revive Atem or not, which I found to be very, very fascinating. Going back, of course, and that's why it's cool to look at this now in hindsight, going back to the main schematics of the movie, I think it would have been so cool. And even though the movie title does imply that it would have been maybe some duels between the original crew and the GX crew, there's nothing more besides the verses that kind of implicates that, even though you do have Takahashi saying that Yugi facing Judai could not happen, as it would be a hero facing his comrade, but that was after the idea was dropped, which makes me think that Yugi versus Judai could have happened maybe earlier or to the middle of the movie. You could have had maybe Ryo Marufuji, Hellkaiser versus Seto Kaiba. You could have had maybe Sho versus Jonochi, Joey Wheeler. You could have had some really, really cool matchups, and then very similar to what happened in Bonds Beyond Time, where Judai and Yugi had to work together alongside Yusei, the protagonist of 5Ds, to defeat Paradox. It probably would have been very similar, where Yugi and Judai would have had to work together to defeat Sartorius, to defeat Sayu. And another interesting element of this movie is that Sayu, who was going to be the main villain of the movie, contacts Kaiba Corporation to plot his schemes. I'm not sure if that indicates Seto Kaiba would have been working with Sayu, or potentially Sayu would have brainwashed Seto Kaiba to get him on his side to verse Yugi, to go against the GX crew. Maybe Kaiba would have been like a minor antagonist, or a, well, he always kind of plays that rival role where he's not really a protagonist or a good guy. He's a lot more of a gray character, Seto Kaiba, in a lot of senses. So maybe that's kind of the role he would have played in this movie. But it would have been very cool. And of course, in GX, when they do take a field trip to Domino City, Sayu still does contact Seto Kaiba. And I believe Seto Kaiba says something along the lines of, keep an eye on that Sayu guy. He kind of intrigues me, or he kind of skeeves me out, or he says something along those lines that he wants his team to keep an eye on Sayu after Sayu gets his permission to use, I believe it's the Kaiba Corporation theme park. I believe that's what it was for, the meeting or the proposal that Sayu gave to Kaiba. I'm not 100% sure, correct me if I'm wrong. Of course, nothing ever came of that. We never saw Seto Kaiba again after this appearance, but it was really cool to see Seto Kaiba show up in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX. We also see Grandpa Moto. Unfortunately, when Jaden asks about Yugi, I think, well, I know in the dub he says Yugi left to get milk, but that was like 5 years ago, which is actually really, really funny, and kind of a take on, that's like a classic joke where if you ask like a wife or a husband and they say, oh yeah, my wife left to get milk. Of course, that was 10 years ago now, so, that's a classic, like, oh yeah, my wife or my husband left me kind of humor. So I thought the reference there was actually pretty funny. One of the GX dub was really something else. But anyway, I don't know exactly what's said in the original. I'm not even sure if Yugi is brought up, but Yugi and Joey and anyone else is nowhere to be found in Domino City, so they obviously did not appear in the show. But it would have been really cool if this movie did happen. So in hindsight, I am disappointed that we did not get this movie, because I think it would have been really, really cool. That being said, you know, at least we got season 2, which was probably how this movie would have played out to a degree. Kind of, yeah, actually probably not, but, you know, it is what it is. Season 2 of GX, probably not my favorite season per se, but clearly the idea came from this movie. So if you ever wondered the origins of season 2 of GX and why maybe some parts of it seemed kind of a little wishy-washy, it could have been that they were writing it on the fly, since it wasn't an idea that they had for the show going into the show. It only came about when Takahashi proposed this movie. So really interesting stuff, guys, but please let me know all your thoughts on this scrapped movie of Yugioh versus GX. I'm excited to hear from all of you down below, and let me know if you would like to see a GX-based movie or a 5Ds-based movie, and moreover, if you would see a movie if it was based on the spin-offs, if it had no reference to Yugimoto. Really interested to hear what you guys have to say about that. And again, I am going to do some videos in regards to movie ideas led by certain shows. So like a Zale movie, a 5Ds movie, a GX movie, if I think it would sell, how I think they could market it, and what the movie could be about. And hopefully that does interest you guys. So definitely be on the lookout for that series, which will be starting on the channel probably sometime in April. A special thank you to my Platinum tier patrons Alexa Baker, Glen McGookin, Jorge Carrillo, James Rose, Omni Lord, Samuel Stark, Thomas Adderley, Horace Maye, and Amber Crystal, and to my Diamond tier patrons Bouldergeist and Jesse Wood, and to my Egyptian God tier patrons Syn Cloud and Chris Swan. A huge thank you to everyone who supports me on Patreon. I cannot tell you how much it helps me out, and a huge thank you to everyone who just watches these videos, because without you guys, I would not be able to do this. I will talk to you down below. I hope you learned something new, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have an amazing day.